There is a type of person you have met before. You cannot quite explain it, but when they walk into a room, something shifts. They do not demand attention. They do not speak often. But when they do speak, every single person in the room stops and listens. These people are not loud. They are not aggressive. They are not trying to convince anyone of anything. And yet there is something about them, a quiet authority, a stillness in the center of the storm, that makes them the most formidable person in any situation they enter. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, the most powerful man on earth for nearly 2 decades, understood this truth at the deepest level. He wrote in his private journal, "Words never meant to be published. Words meant only for himself. The first rule is to keep an untroubled spirit. The second is to look things in the face and know them for what they are." Aurelius did not become dangerous by raising his voice. He became dangerous by mastering his silence. And the uncomfortable truth that most people miss is this: the moment you go silent, truly silent, not passive, not weak, not defeated, but deliberately, purposefully, strategically silent, you become the most dangerous version of yourself. Most people are terrified of silence. They rush to fill every gap in conversation. They react immediately when criticized. They defend themselves at the first sign of attack. They argue back. They justify. They explain. And every time they do, they hand their power over to someone else. Because here is what the Stoics understood about the human mind, that most modern psychology is only now beginning to confirm. Every word you speak in reaction is proof that someone else controls you. Think about the last time someone criticized you harshly, or insulted you, or challenged you in a way that felt unfair. What happened inside you? Your heart rate climbed. Your jaw tightened. Words rushed to the surface. You wanted, urgently and desperately, to respond. And if you did respond from that place, from that reactive, hijacked state, you likely said things you did not mean, revealed information you did not intend to share, or showed a weakness you would have preferred to keep hidden. That is not power. That is surrender. Marcus Aurelius called this reaction the first movement, the instinctive, animal response to a stimulus, the flash of anger, the sting of shame, the impulse to strike back. He did not say you would not feel it. He did not pretend the Stoic was made of stone. What he said was that the wise person does not act on the first movement. They observe it. They let it pass. And then, from a place of quiet deliberation, they choose their response. That gap between stimulus and response, that silent space, is where all true power lives. If you have ever watched someone lose an argument, they were winning simply because they could not control their reaction. You have seen this principle at work. The person with the better facts and the louder voice often loses to the person with the quieter composure. Because composure signals something that volume never can. It signals that you are not threatened. It signals that you do not need anyone's validation. It signals that you are operating from a position of internal security that external chaos cannot shake. And people, whether they are consciously aware of it or not, recognize that signal. They feel it, and it changes how they treat you. If you have ever encountered someone like this in your own life, someone who stayed calm when everything around them was breaking, type "I want" that in the comments right now. Because by the end of this, you will understand exactly how to build it. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about what he called the inner citadel. The idea was simple but radical. Everything outside you, your reputation, your circumstances, what others think of you, what happens to you, can all be taken. All of it. But there is one thing no one can ever take from you: your ability to choose how you respond. Your inner world. Your ruling reason. The part of you that stands apart from the noise and makes a deliberate, conscious decision about how to act. The inner citadel is built through silence. Not the silence of weakness, not the silence of someone who has nothing to say, but the silence of someone who has chosen not to say it. There is an enormous difference between those two things. One is empty. The other is loaded. One communicates defeat. The other communicates mastery. Epictetus, another Stoic master, born into actual slavery, who understood more deeply than most what it meant to have nothing, taught his students that speech is cheap and silence is expensive. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, he taught, so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. But Epictetus meant something deeper than simply listening more. He meant that every unnecessary word costs you something. It costs you composure. It costs you information. It costs you the respect of the room. And most devastatingly, it costs you knowledge of yourself. Because here is a truth that most people never examine. You cannot hear yourself think when you will not stop talking. The person who fills every silence with words is not processing. They are performing. And performance, however polished, is always a kind of anxiety dressed up as confidence. Real confidence is comfortable with silence. Real confidence does not need to fill the gap. Real confidence can sit across from someone who is angry or critical or provocative and simply wait. Because it knows that time, used correctly, is one of the most devastating weapons available to a disciplined mind. Sun Tzu understood this in the context of war. The general who advances without coveting fame and retreats without fearing disgrace, whose only thought is to protect his country and do good service for his sovereign, is the jewel of the kingdom. Strip away the military language, and what Sun Tzu is describing is the person who does not react to praise or blame, who does not need to be seen winning, who does not flinch at the appearance of losing, who operates from a strategic patience that is invisible to reactive minds. That strategic patience is silence in action. And here is where it becomes genuinely dangerous. When you go silent in a conflict, when you refuse to react to provocation, when you absorb the attack without a visible response, you do something psychologically devastating to the person trying to destabilize you. You take away their power. Because provocation only works if you respond to it. Insults only land if you acknowledge them. A challenge only threatens you if you feel threatened. When you remain quiet, composed, unbothered, the provocateur is left standing in an empty arena, swinging at air. Marcus Aurelius saw this play out in court. As emperor, he was surrounded by people who tested him, flattered him, attempted to manipulate him. Senators who disagreed with his decisions, generals who questioned his authority, advisors who competed for influence. And his recorded response to these pressures is telling. He did not match fire with fire. He wrote about these provocations privately, in his journal, as a way of processing them without letting them erupt outward. The journal itself was an act of strategic silence. He was not suppressing his feelings. He was governing them. There is a profound difference between suppression and governance. Suppression is when you push something down because you are afraid of it. Governance is when you see it clearly, acknowledge it honestly, and then decide what to do with it through reason rather than impulse. Aurelius was a master of governance. His journals are full of moments where he talks himself down from impatience, from irritation, from the temptation to act from ego. He held the space between stimulus and response with a grip of iron. And that is the discipline I want to talk about, because it is not easy. In fact, the ability to stay silent when every instinct screams at you to speak is one of the hardest disciplines a human being can develop. Most of us were never taught it. We were taught to express ourselves, to advocate for ourselves, to speak up. And those are not bad instincts. But they become destructive when they are driven by reactivity rather than wisdom. There is speaking from clarity, and there is speaking from compulsion. Only one of them serves you. Robert Greene, in his study of power and human nature, identified silence as one of the most reliable markers of power in history. People who talk too much, he observed, give away their thinking, their insecurities, their strategies, their desires. The more you say, the more ordinary you appear, because words are abundant and anyone can produce them. But silence is rare. Genuine, unhurried, purposeful silence is so rare in our noisy world that the person who embodies it automatically commands a kind of gravity that talkers never will. Consider this in your own experience. Who do you respect more? The person who has an opinion on everything and shares all of it immediately, or the person who listens carefully, thinks deeply, and when they do finally speak, says something that cuts straight to the truth? You already know the answer. We are wired to assign more weight to words that are given carefully than to words that are given freely. Now let us talk about what silence actually looks like in the moments when it is hardest to maintain. Someone challenges you publicly. They question your competence, your decisions, your character. The room watches. Everything in you wants to defend, to explain, to justify. What does Marcus Aurelius do? He pauses. He breathes. He asks himself a single question that he returned to again and again in his journals. Is this a matter of principle or of ego? If someone questioning you threatens your ego but not your actual values or your actual work, then silence is not defeat. Silence is surgical. It cuts away the ego and lets the work speak for itself. He also wrote this, and it is one of the most disarming things a powerful person can internalize. If someone is able to show me that what I think or do is not right, I will happily change, for I seek the truth, by which no one was ever truly harmed. The person who holds this belief does not need to defend themselves from criticism, because they are genuinely open to being wrong. And when you are genuinely open to being wrong, criticism loses its sting. You can sit in silence and examine the challenge on its merits, not on the emotional charge it carries. This is a level of psychological security that most people never reach. Because most people secretly believe that if they are wrong about something important, it means they are fundamentally flawed. And so they argue, not to discover the truth, but to protect their sense of self. The Stoic does not have this problem. The Stoic has separated their identity from their opinions. The Stoic can say, I was wrong, and I have changed my view, with the same calm equanimity they bring to everything else. And that willingness to be wrong, held in silence rather than defended in noise, is a form of strength that very few people in history have demonstrated, and even fewer have understood. Type "silence is strength" in the comments if you have felt the pull of this. Because this is the discipline that separates the person who merely talks about wisdom from the person who actually lives it. And there is something worth noting about the world we live in now. We are the noisiest generation in human history. We carry devices that deliver a continuous stream of stimulation, reaction, opinion, and noise directly into our hands and ears at every moment of the day. The average person spends hours each day consuming content designed specifically to provoke a reaction, to trigger an emotional response, to keep them engaged and activated and agitated. And the effect on the inner life is devastating. When you are constantly stimulated, constantly reacting, constantly filling every quiet moment with more input, you lose the ability to sit with yourself. You lose the capacity for the kind of deep, still, reflective silence that builds the inner citadel Aurelius wrote about. The result is a civilization of people who are extraordinarily loud and extraordinarily fragile. People who mistake busyness for productivity, noise for confidence, reaction for strength. In this environment, the person who can be genuinely, deliberately quiet does not just stand out. They become almost incomprehensible to the reactive masses around them. And incomprehensibility, when it comes from depth rather than distance, is one of the most powerful positions a person can occupy. Now let us look at what silence builds over time. Because this is not just about individual moments of composure, it is about what a lifetime of chosen silence constructs inside you. Marcus Aurelius ruled Rome for nearly 20 years. In that time, he fought wars on multiple fronts, navigated a devastating plague, dealt with treachery inside his own court, and managed an empire of 50 million people. The weight of that was enormous. And by every historical account, he bore it with a consistency of character that historians still marvel at. Not because he had no inner life, not because he felt nothing, but because he had built, through years of daily philosophical practice, an inner fortress that external chaos could not breach. Silence was his practice and his product. Every morning he wrote in his journal, not for publication, not for posterity, just for himself. It was a daily act of sitting in silence with his own mind, examining it honestly, rooting out the weeds of vanity and fear and resentment, and replanting the seeds of duty, reason, and virtue. Over time, this practice built a character so consistent, so anchored, that it functioned like a gravitational field. People orbited around it, whether they intended to or not. That is what true silence builds. Not just the ability to stay quiet in a difficult moment, but a depth of self-knowledge that makes you unmanipulable. Because manipulation only works on people who do not know themselves. It works on people whose fears and desires are visible and exploitable. But the person who has sat in silence long enough to understand their own inner landscape, who knows their triggers, their vanities, their blind spots, that person cannot be easily moved. They have already seen the bait. They are not interested. Lao Tzu, writing from an entirely different tradition than the Stoics, but arriving at the same truth from a different direction, said this in the Tao Te Ching: knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is true wisdom. Mastering others is strength. Mastering yourself is true power. The mastery Lao Tzu describes is the fruit of silence. You cannot know yourself in noise. You cannot hear the quiet voice of your own deepest values and instincts when the constant chatter of your reactive mind drowns it out. But in silence, real silence, that voice becomes audible. And when you learn to listen to it, and then act from it, that is when you become, in the truest sense of the word, dangerous. Because you are no longer predictable. The reactive person is utterly predictable. You know exactly what they will do when you push their buttons, because their buttons are external. They are attached to outcomes they cannot control, to opinions they desperately want to change, to approval they cannot stop seeking. They are not free. They are running a program written by their environment and their wounds and their conditioning. But the person who has mastered silence runs a different program entirely. One written by their own values and their own deliberate choices. And that is not a program anyone outside them can read or predict or manipulate. In practical terms, this changes everything about how you move through the world. In negotiations, silence is one of the most powerful tools available. The person who speaks first in a moment of tension often concedes something they did not intend to. The one who holds the silence forces the other side to fill it, often revealing far more than they planned to share. Aurelius's diplomatic advisors understood this, and so did every great negotiator in history. Silence is not the absence of strategy. It is one of the most advanced strategies available. In conflict, silence diffuses what argument inflames. The person who refuses to argue does not lose. They withdraw the fuel that keeps the fire burning. And a fire with no fuel dies, no matter how hot it burns. The person screaming at you is waiting for you to scream back. When you do not, when you simply look at them with calm, patient, undisturbed eyes, you have already won. Not because you overpowered them, because you refused to enter the arena on their terms. In leadership, silence creates space for others. The leader who speaks constantly leaves no room for those around them to contribute, to think, to grow. But the leader who listens deeply and speaks rarely creates a kind of gravity that pulls out the best from everyone in the room. Marcus Aurelius was famous for listening to his advisors fully before rendering judgment. Even when he disagreed, even when he found the argument weak, he gave the silence that made people feel heard. And then he decided. That combination, deep listening and decisive action, is the hallmark of genuine authority. And in your own inner life, silence is the single most powerful practice available for developing the mind. Not meditation in the exotic sense, not formal philosophy, just deliberate periods of quiet in which you examine your own thinking, your own motives, your own fears. The practice Marcus Aurelius maintained every morning for decades. Just a man and his journal and his willingness to be honest about what he found there. He once wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." That is not a passive statement. That is the conclusion of a man who has done the work, who has gone into the noise of his own mind and cleaned it out and made it into a dwelling place of quiet strength. And if you commit to that work, day after day, morning after morning, you build the same thing. So here is the question I want to leave you with. What would change in your life if, starting today, you chose silence before speech? Not in every situation, not as a rule, but as a default, as a first instinct to question rather than satisfy. What would change if, the next time someone provokes you, you paused before responding? Not because you have nothing to say, but because you choose to look at them with calm eyes and decide, from a place of full presence and clear judgment, whether what you are about to say serves your values or only your ego. Marcus Aurelius did this every day for 20 years while governing an empire. You can do it in your office, in your home, in your relationships, in every arena where someone is waiting to see if they can pull your strings. The dangerous person is not the one who explodes. The dangerous person is the one who never does. The one who has built such a deep and fortified inner life that nothing outside them can reach in far enough to take control. The one who looks at chaos with the same steady eyes they bring to calm. The one who has learned, through years of quiet practice, that the most powerful thing in any room is the person who needs the least from it. That is the person Marcus Aurelius was working to become every single morning. Not perfect, not finished, but committed. Committed to the daily practice of governing himself before attempting to govern anything else. And the paradox that sits at the heart of this entire philosophy is beautiful. The more you master your silence, the less you need to use it as a weapon. Because the truly dangerous person does not need to intimidate, does not need to posture, does not need to prove anything to anyone. They simply live from a depth of self-possession that speaks louder than any argument ever could. Go silent, go inward, and become what the noise around you will never let you be as long as you keep feeding it. If this reached something in you today, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment with the word silent as your commitment to this practice. And subscribe if you want more of this, because we are just getting started.